Welcome to today's podcast. I'm David Ammons with Retirement Living Associates. Our podcast is Retire Wise North Carolina, and it's a combined effort between Retirement Living Associates and Retirement Resource Guide. Today we have a special guest with us, Tom Akins, who is the President and Executive Director of LeadingAge of North Carolina. It's an organization I've been aware of and worked with for many years, through a good bit of my career. So Tom, welcome today, and tell us a little bit about LeadingAge, or just sort of a broad brush.
Great. David, thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. You have been a leader in this field for so long, and it's just a privilege to be here and share some thoughts with you. LeadingAge North Carolina has about 60 communities across the state of North Carolina. Some of those, the majority of those, are continuing care retirement communities, and we really serve as the connector for those communities between policymakers at the General Assembly, other stakeholders, LeadingAge National. We try to think about this in a story that I'm sure is apocryphal, but it's Wayne Gretzky, greatest hockey player of all time. His dad was at a banquet and they asked him why his son was so good, and they said it was because he skated to where the puck was going to be instead of where the puck was.
That's right.
I think LeadingAge North Carolina looks at our role as trying to help communities figure out where they ought to be headed.
That's good. I wasn't aware you had continuing care retirement communities and not continuing care retirement communities. What else makes up the membership?
So we've got about 15 affordable housing communities across the state, and so it gives us kind of both ends of that spectrum in terms of consumers that are looking for a different option for retirement living.
And I know there's several or numerous, depends on how you look at it, I guess, other associations. Is LeadingAge specifically nonprofit or blended or some of both? Or
we've been around since 1956. And so for the first how many ever years of our existence, we had been strictly nonprofit. Last year, our board made the decision to accept for-profit members, and so during 2025, we'll be welcoming those. We think will be helpful for us because it's just more folks at the table sharing our opinions about how
I think that's great. I think that's great. I know over the years, I have found, I've been in both for a long time, the for-profit world and the nonprofit, and some of the nonprofits really were sort of anti or nervous or pushed back, and I think that just is not best for the senior community, senior citizens, et cetera. So
yeah, I think at the end of the day, we've got the same goal in mind. It's serving seniors. The IRS has a different way that they classify us for tax purposes, but we're all trying to accomplish this.
That's right. Good. I applaud that. I was not aware. I'd heard it was going to blend some, but I didn't know it was that technical. So that's great. Another big factor that I know you work with a lot and that you and I have communicated on over the years is the North Carolina Department of Insurance and their role and their oversight, regulation, et cetera. So can you speak to that a little bit? I want to be sure we focus as a resident of North Carolina or a senior considering coming to North Carolina. And when I say resident, I don't mean necessarily in a community yet, just a population person. How does the Department of Insurance, how's that agency benefit what I will enjoy later?
I think if you talk to folks around the country, and we do, North Carolina is the state that is held up as the model for a regulatory environment. And I think while that can ebb and flow, I think for the most part over the years, the Department of Insurance has been really collaborative because they want to see continuing care retirement communities, other senior options be successful in this state. And so because of that, they've taken a real collaborative approach. That we've had a CCRC statute in this state for 30 plus years. Yeah. And while that's taken some getting used to, as you know, over time, communities have normed to that, and the end result has been a set of really financially secure communities, which is great for consumers. And we're working on some changes to the statute now that I think will be even better for consumers because it introduces some additional transparency. Everybody wants to know. I mean, it's a big decision to move to a CCRC. And
well, I think, and nationwide, I think everybody's in favor of more transparency, more disclosure, more things. So
right.
That's good news.
So I think that in that regard, when you look at everything else that North Carolina has to offer, whether you live here already or whether you're thinking about moving here, The regulatory environment that we have that's led by the Department of Insurance has been, on balance, something that has been really favorable for consumers. And I'll tell you, it's been favorable for communities as well, which is a good thing, because the stronger they are, the more protected the consumer is, or the resident that lives with them.
Yes, I agree. I used to worry, I'd hear development world, I'd go to country, nationwide associations, and they viewed North Carolina's regulation as a barrier to entry, which if you're here, you might say that's good, we don't need everyone else. On the other hand, that can't be good in the long run for diversity of product types, models, et cetera. So I think that it's good that it has found some balance. One thing I don't normally call out in the podcast, but I will in this case, because I think most of what you said about how it has evolved in 30 years is tied to Jeff Trindle's mindset. I think he's excellent and aims for how do we monitor, how do we acquire disclosure without becoming micromanagement, et cetera. So I think I'm sure you know him well.
Yeah, Jeff's deputy commissioner at the Department of Insurance, and he has served our field and consumers really well. He's been around for a long time. There's a certain flexibility about Jeff, because he wants, at the end of the day, for this to be a positive experience, whether you live or you work or you run a CCRC in this state, and that has served us really well over the years.
Let's talk about, I mentioned barrier to entry, but let's take that in a more positive light, which is the baby boom is here. Right. It's funny, I date myself because I was managing a retirement community before the Department of Insurance regulated us. So I didn't know it was 30 years ago, but that doesn't surprise me. But as I look at that, we've been talking about the baby boom, this swell of population, et cetera, that's on the way. And so I think it's here. Is that correct? Or
Yep.
do you keep up with that demographically? Or, I'm curious how you think that will impact. We're going to need more places built. And if you do more, you're going to have some good, some bad, et cetera. So if you will just speak to what you think about the industry growing significantly.
Yeah, so we just finished a year-long study that University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Business School did for us. And what they tried to do was to quantify our impact on the state's economy. Oh. And as they did that, they had to look at demographics. And so, right now there's about 65 CCRCs in the state. They have about 25,000 residents, about 18,000 staff members that serve them. And so their annual impact on the state's economy is about $4.8 billion.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it's a huge amount.
Right.
And they account for almost $600 million in taxes for the feds, state, and locals. What we asked the business school to do was to not only quantify it now, but we said, go forward to 2050 and give us some idea in North Carolina what those numbers will look like. Their projections are that by 2050, we'll move from about 25,000 residents to about 48,000 residents at CCRCs, from about 18,000 staff to about 34,000 staff, and an annual economic impact of $8 billion a year, and $1 billion in taxes. And so the case that I think we're having increasing success with this, but the case we try to make with policymakers is, if you had a business that served 25,000 North Carolinians and had 18,000 staff, and a future as bright as ours is, because the number of seniors in this state is continuing to increase, you would do everything you could to make sure that that group was successful. And so I think that's why we're positive about the fact that North Carolina will continue to be a great state to stay and retire, but also to move to and retire, because policymakers understand CCRCs are good for this state.
I can't promise you I'll be here in 25 years managing a retirement community, but I would beg to differ. I think it'll be a larger increase than 25,000 to 48,000. I thought you were going to say triple or something. So we'll see. I'm sure they had to use a certain amount of how much has grown in the last 20 years and projecting that forward. And so how much the baby boom in the population changes it. Yeah. We'll leave it up to those experts. But that's
a great example of that is they did this study for us 8 years ago and projected forward. And at this point, our annual impact on the state's economy was supposed to be $3.4 billion. It's $4.8 billion.
There you go.
And so, yeah, they have to be conservative about some things. And it's a great lesson for policymakers that the more they encourage development and growth, responsible development and growth, the bigger the benefit is for the state.
Well, and I do a good bit of work in the arena of telling towns or cities or developments that senior community development is good. They don't have kids that go to school. They don't drive in 9 o'clock traffic, 5 o'clock traffic. Right. So there's a lot of things that it's good. So I'm glad to hear it's being studied like that. I know that we used to throw around a statistic about one active adult or 65 plus person was equivalent of like 3 new manufacturing jobs, or I forget those ratios, but it's an interesting thing. There is a very definite economic measurable difference, right? So
there is, and that tax that they bring in, that positive economic impact and just cultural impact, everything, is all against the backdrop of they're not using schools, they're using roads, but probably not as much. You've got communities like you have that are self-contained, and so there are lots of things that we take on ourselves that government ordinarily would have to do. So
that's right.
It's just a good way all the way around.
I would agree 100%. I'm also intrigued by something you may not see as firsthand, but I'm amazed the people that now I have seen who've spent their career in the retirement community industry. And so it's just amazing. As you and I joked earlier, Kyle Dilday, who worked with me for 38 years, is just retired. And to have done this for 38 years is one thing, and that's in an executive type role or management role. But we also have staff at our communities that have been in food service or housekeeping and different stuff for their entire adult life. It's just a crazy thing. Somehow it hits me.
Which is a great thing for folks who live and work at these communities to be able to benefit from that experience and that expertise. But it's also a challenge for us because we got to figure out how we're going to replace the Kyle Dildays and the other folks who have been here for so long. And so a part of what we try to do is to talk about why this field is so great and it's so rewarding to be a part of.
I echo that. I'm sure. Tell me a little bit about what you think the new changes. I don't want to get technical at all, but I know that what we refer to all the time, General Statute 5864, and I can quote too well, is going through some rewrites. And the goal of our podcast is not, legislative update, but it is. These are the first real big changes in a long time. Some are big, some are little, but just overall, speak to that a minute, if you will.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in context is that there's been a 20-member task force that has worked for about 2 years on this. Obviously, in the last 30 years, legal structures, organizational structures, financing structures have changed. The statute hasn't necessarily kept up with that. But the task force has been comprised of residents and providers and subject matter experts in the field. And that task force had 2 goals. One was they couldn't lessen any consumer protections that already existed. And in fact, the work that they've done has strengthened those consumer protections. The second thing was they couldn't adopt new statute provisions that would be unduly burdensome to providers. Again, with this notion that the stronger your provider is, the more protected your consumer is going to be, the better experience that they're going to have. And so there have been some things that we talked earlier about, some transparency kinds of things that consumers will have more information about. There'll be some things for providers around things like the operating reserve and how much they have to keep in that moving forward. But I think that at the end of the day, the new statute will provide a modern environment for providers to work in, while at the same time guaranteeing consumers that they're going to have the ability to see how things work and to be able to provide perspective on that.
Good. And those are all good points. One thing, I haven't studied it to the depth you have, but I also think there's some things that it will clean up, nuances. I'm not. Well, I'll say it to say I'm not using the word loophole, but there are some things that are a little bit judgment or gray,
right.
And it seems to me they're tightening some of those up, which I think is helpful because I meet with some groups who are very focused on dodging and skirting everything they can, and then other groups who are going to be exactly by the letter of the law. And so it's nice to see that tightened up enough. We don't have much discretion there, I think. So.
And I think you can see that both in terms of that task force met every 2 weeks for 3 hours for 2 years.
Wow.
And so, we probably are more alike on this than you know, but the statute has gone from about 8 pages to about 65 pages. And ordinarily I would think, oh, more regulation, this is not what I want. But I think that expanded statute has in many ways been framed around how do we make sure that things are really clear about how things are going to work.
Good. I think that's all good news. I appreciate you sharing. Before we wrap up, I'm curious if you can speak to, I can't at all, so I welcome you to talk a little bit about LeadingAge US or the bigger picture. To date myself, I was going to the national conferences back when it was the North Carolina Association of Nonprofit Homes for the Aged, and we went to whatever the bigger ones were called. I forget all the acronyms over the years, but I assume you participate as a state representative to the national. So
yeah. So we're part of LeadingAge National. They've got about 6,000 member communities, about 3 million people that they serve all told. Back when it was ASA, or before that when it was AHA.
Yeah, that's right.
You'd have a national conference that would have 800 or 900 people. We just got back from the national conference in Nashville. They had 8,000 people at the conference.
Yeah.
There's good and bad with that, but it really is helpful for us in terms of LeadingAge National taking the lead on issues at a federal level. So they coordinate most of that work around Congress. We obviously reach out to our elected folks, but it's another piece of just trying to figure out how we connect different sources of information so that communities have the best information moving forward.
Good. All sounds great. Thank you, Tom. It's good to see you.
You too.
I appreciate you taking the time to help us with one of our podcast series. It's a new venture for us, and we're working our way through that. So thank you again. Good
Thanks,
to see
David.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.